A desperate young mother, clinging to her infant in the face of an Alaskan blizzard, discovers that sometimes sanctuary arrives in the most unexpected form. The wind howled a mournful tune, whipping snow into merciless sheets that blurred the world into a freezing, white canvas. 17-year-old Sarah Jennings huddled at the edge transit stop, her thin jacket pulled tight around herself and the tiny bundle in her arms. Her 2-month-old daughter, Lily. The temperature had plummeted, and the last bus was long gone. Just hours before, she'd stood on the porch of the Jennings residence front porch, watching her father throw her duffel bag into the snow. "No daughter of ours will bring such shame to this family." His voice, colder than the winter air, echoed in her memory. Behind him, her mother cried silently, making no move to intercede for her daughter or granddaughter. Sarah had chosen Lily over her family's pristine reputation in their conservative community, a choice that now felt impossibly heavy as the snow piled higher. Her breath plumed out in ragged clouds, tears freezing on her cheeks. How quickly the world can turn its back when you need it most. She sank deeper into the flimsy shelter of the bus stop, the crushing weight of her isolation a physical ache. Stranded and freezing, a flicker of hope appears on the horizon, driven by an engine that sounds as weathered as the woman behind the wheel. The whimpers from the bundle in her arms, her precious Lily, were quieter now, a sound that somehow terrified Sarah more than the earlier cries. "Stay awake, baby, please stay awake," she whispered, her voice raw with cold and fear. Each frozen breath felt like a prayer, a desperate plea sent out into the unforgiving Alaskan night. She began walking, her inadequate sneakers crunching through the deepening snow, each step a monumental effort against the biting wind. It felt like wandering into the end of the world, alone, with the most important part of her heart clutched tightly to her chest. Then, like distant stars against the white blur, headlights appeared. They grew larger, cutting through the heavy snowfall, the rumble of an engine reaching her over the howl of the wind. A vehicle approached. A battered blue pickup truck. It slowed beside her, its engine groaning in protest against the cold. The driver's window rolled down with a mechanical whine, a sound that seemed to echo the weariness of the world around them. And there she was, an elderly woman, framed by the window, with wild silver hair escaping from beneath a knitted hat. Mismatched gloves covered her weathered hands, gripping the steering wheel like she'd wrestled it into submission years ago. Her face was a roadmap of a life lived hard, etched with lines that spoke of sun, wind, and perhaps sorrow. But her eyes, even in the dim light filtering from the truck's interior, were sharp, assessing. "You two look like you're in a proper pickle, aren't you?" the woman called out, her voice a harsh Alaskan accent that cut through the howling wind like a physical thing. Sarah hesitated. Every warning she'd ever heard about strangers screamed in her head. The truck looked ancient, its blue paint peeling, the bed piled high with what looked like strange items covered by a tarp. And the woman, she wasn't exactly the picture of grandmotherly comfort. She was formidable, unpredictable. She clutched Lily closer, a purely instinctive act of protection. But Lily, as if sensing the potential warmth, let out another cry. This one was weaker than before, a tiny, fragile sound that broke through Sarah's fear. "I don't bite, girl," the woman called out again, her voice softening just slightly at the sound of the baby. "But that storm sure will. It's dropping 10 degrees an hour out here." 10 degrees an hour. The reality of that sank into Sarah's bones, colder than the air itself. Lily wouldn't last much longer out here, neither would she. "I'm Eleanor Vance," the woman said, her voice now gentler, a hint of something almost like compassion in her tone. "That little one won't last another hour in this weather." Eleanor Vance was right. Sarah knew it with a certainty that went beyond thought, a primal knowledge that settled deep in her gut. Her legs trembling, she trudged through the snow to the passenger side of the truck. It felt like a leap of faith, stepping towards the unknown, but the alternative was unthinkable. Lily needed warmth. She needed safety. And in this moment, this battered blue truck and its eccentric driver were the only possibility. When she opened the door, a wave of warmth hit her, blessed and immediate, pushing back the biting cold. The heater was blasting, filling the small cab with a comforting heat. But the sight that greeted her inside was unexpected. The dashboard was covered with small figurines, hand-carved animals, some antique dolls with unsettling glass eyes that seemed to stare right through her, and several crystals hanging from strings, catching the dim light. The back seat was piled high with books, papers, and Sarah blinked in disbelief. A taxidermy owl perched atop a cardboard box, its glass eyes fixed in an eternal, unblinking stare. It was chaotic, strange, and utterly fascinating. Pine, tobacco, and something earthy she couldn't identify filled the air. Eleanor raised an eyebrow, her sharp, pale blue eyes, almost silver like the winter sky outside, assessing Sarah once more. Well, in or out, I can't heat all of Alaska. Sarah climbed in awkwardly, settling herself and Lily onto the worn passenger seat, the warmth already beginning to thaw the fear that had settled in her chest. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't know this woman. Could this unusual woman possibly be their salvation? All she knew was that, for the first time in hours, she and Lily were warm, and that, in this moment, was everything. Stepping inside, the freezing world is replaced by unexpected warmth and a scene that defies every expectation of normalcy. "Where are you headed?" Eleanor asked, putting the truck in gear, her sharp eyes studying Sarah for a long moment before turning back to the snowy road. Sarah's voice caught, still thawing. "I don't know." The admission hung in the air, heavy with the weight of her displacement. Eleanor just nodded, as if confirming something she'd already suspected. No home? Then? Sarah shook her head, tears threatening again, despite the warmth. Not anymore. Eleanor Vance didn't pry, didn't ask for details Sarah wasn't ready to give. Instead, she simply said, "I'm 20 miles outside town. Got a cabin. It's nothing much, but it's warm. You two can wait out the storm there." Sarah should have been frightened. Every story, every warning about accepting rides from strangers, screamed in her head. This woman was a complete unknown, driving her deeper into the Alaskan wilderness in a truck filled with bizarre objects. But when Lily's tiny fingers wrapped around her thumb, seeking warmth and comfort, the fear receded, replaced by a fierce, protective instinct and the desperate need for safety. What choice did she really have? "Thank you," she whispered, the words feeling inadequate. Eleanor made a dismissive sound. "Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen where I live." The drive was long, the falling snow illuminating a world transformed into ghostly white shapes in the headlights. The truck rattled and groaned, and Eleanor occasionally muttered to herself for the vehicle, adding to the sense of being transported to a place outside ordinary experience. Sarah's fear resurfaced briefly. You're not going to hurt us, are you?" she finally managed to ask, her voice small. Eleanor barked out a laugh, a surprisingly warm sound that did little to dispel the initial apprehension. "Girl, if I wanted to hurt you, I'd have left you at that bus stop. Nature would have done the job for me." She glanced at Lily, asleep in Sarah's arms. "Besides, I don't hurt children. Never have. Never will." There was something in the way she said it, a sudden stillness, a heaviness that spoke of a history Sarah couldn't yet imagine, but that made her believe her. The Vance homestead appeared suddenly between the trees, its windows glowing with a warm, inviting light. From the outside, it looked tiny, a simple A-frame structure with a steep roof designed to shed the relentless snow. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, a visible sign of the blessed heat within. "Home, sweet home," Eleanor announced, pulling the truck to a stop. Getting from the truck to the cabin was an adventure in itself. The snow was nearly knee-deep, and Eleanor, surprisingly spry, despite her age, forged ahead, creating a path for Sarah to follow. Lily held securely against her chest. By the time they reached the porch, Sarah was exhausted and freezing again, the brief warmth of the truck a fading memory. Eleanor pushed open the door, and Sarah stepped into a world unlike anything she had ever seen. The cabin's interior was surprisingly spacious, much larger than it had appeared from the outside. But it wasn't the size that made Sarah pause. It was the contents. Every surface, every wall space seemed filled with things. Collections of rocks and shells, bookshelves overflowing with volumes in multiple languages Sarah couldn't even identify, dried plants hanging from ceiling beams, strange artwork that looked both primitive and somehow scientific. A large workbench dominated one corner, covered with papers, magnifying glasses, and what appeared to be bone fragments. It was chaotic, yes, but somehow organized, as if the entire space were the physical manifestation of a brilliant but scattered mind. Sarah stood frozen, taking it all in. This was not what she had expected, not even close. "Close your mouth, girl. You'll catch flies," Eleanor said, hanging her parka on a hook by the door, her voice back to its usual gruff tone. The central space was dominated by a large wood stove, radiating a blessed, powerful heat. Eleanor immediately went to work, stoking the fire higher, the movements of her weathered hands efficient and practiced. "Sit," she instructed, pointing to a worn but comfortable-looking armchair near the stove. Sarah sank into it gratefully, the tension in her shoulders finally beginning to ease. She unwrapped Lily from her outer blanket. The baby's cheeks were red from the cold, her tiny nose running. Without being asked, Eleanor disappeared into what must have been the homestead kitchen area. She returned minutes later with a bottle of warm formula. "How did you—" Sarah began, staring at the bottle in disbelief. "Figured that's what she'd need," Eleanor said with a shrug, as if producing warm formula in the middle of a blizzard in a cabin in the Alaskan wilderness was the most natural thing in the world. Been a while, but some things you don't forget. As Sarah fed Lily, the simple rhythmic act grounding her amidst the strangeness, she felt a maternal instinct intertwine with her exhaustion. Eleanor disappeared again. This time, when she returned, she was carrying what looked like an actual wooden drawer, one she had lined with soft blankets. "Makeshift crib," she explained, setting it down near the stove. "Babies sleep better with solid sides around them. Feels secure." Sarah stared at her, a new wave of questions forming. How did this eccentric scientist, living alone in the wilderness, know so much about caring for a baby? "I've known many beginnings and endings." "Child," Eleanor said, her expression flickering with a shadow of something Sarah couldn't quite decipher. Before Sarah could ask what that meant, Eleanor was already moving again, gathering supplies. She returned with a towel, some clothes that looked well worn but clean, and a bar of soap. "Bathroom's through there," she said, nodding to a door. "Water's hot if you're quick. Generators working overtime in this storm." Only then did Sarah realize how disheveled she must look and smell. She hadn't showered properly since leaving the Jennings family home that morning. The thought of clean clothes, of washing away the grime and the emotional weight of the day, was incredibly appealing. "I can watch the little one," Eleanor offered, seeing her hesitation. "Been a while, but I haven't forgotten how to hold a baby." Trusting this strange woman with Lily seemed inadvisable by any rational standard, and yet there was something about Eleanor Vance that inspired confidence, a competence in her movements, a directness in her gaze that spoke of someone who had seen much of life and knew how to handle its challenges. It wasn't the polished assurance her parents valued, but something deeper, more rooted. Could this chaotic, strange place truly be a safe haven in that moment, surrounded by the blizzard and the scent of pine and something earthy? Sarah decided it had to be. Stepping inside, the freezing world is replaced by unexpected warmth and a scene that defies every expectation of normalcy. "Where are you headed?" Eleanor asked, putting the truck in gear, her sharp eyes studying Sarah for a long moment before turning back to the snowy road. Sarah's voice caught, still thawing. "I don't know." The admission hung in the air, heavy with the weight of her displacement. Eleanor just nodded, as if confirming something she'd already suspected. "No home." Then Sarah shook her head, tears threatening again despite the warmth. "Not anymore." Eleanor Vance didn't pry, didn't ask for details Sarah wasn't ready to give. Instead, she simply said, "I'm 20 miles outside town. Got a cabin. It's nothing much, but it's warm. You two can wait out the storm there." Sarah should have been frightened. Every story, every warning about accepting rides from strangers, screamed in her head. This woman was a complete unknown. driving her deeper into the Alaskan wilderness in a truck filled with bizarre objects. But when Lily's tiny fingers wrapped around her thumb, seeking warmth and comfort, the fear receded, replaced by a fierce protective instinct and the desperate need for safety. What choice did she really have? "Thank you," she whispered, the words feeling inadequate. Eleanor made a dismissive sound. "Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen where I live." The drive was long, the falling snow illuminating a world transformed into ghostly white shapes in the headlights. The truck rattled and groaned, and Eleanor occasionally muttered to herself or the vehicle, adding to the sense of being transported to a place outside ordinary experience. Sarah's fear resurfaced briefly. You're not going to hurt us, are you?" she finally managed to ask, her voice small. Eleanor barked out a laugh, a surprisingly warm sound that did little to dispel the initial apprehension. "Girl, if I wanted to hurt you, I'd have left you at that bus stop. Nature would have done the job for me." She glanced at Lily, asleep in Sarah's arms. "Besides, I don't hurt children. Never have. Never will." There was something in the way she said it, a sudden stillness, a heaviness that spoke of a history Sarah couldn't yet imagine, but that made her believe her. The Vance homestead appeared suddenly between the trees, its windows glowing with a warm, inviting light. From the outside, it looked tiny, a simple A-frame structure with a steep roof designed to shed the relentless snow. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, a visible sign of the blessed heat within. "Home sweet home," Eleanor announced, pulling the truck to a stop. Getting from the truck to the cabin was an adventure in itself. The snow was nearly knee-deep, and Eleanor, surprisingly spry despite her age, forged ahead, creating a path for Sarah to follow. Lily held securely against her chest. By the time they reached the porch, Sarah was exhausted and freezing again, the brief warmth of the truck a fading memory. Eleanor pushed open the door, and Sarah stepped into a world unlike anything she had ever seen. The cabin's interior was surprisingly spacious, much larger than it had appeared from the outside. But it wasn't the size that made Sarah pause. It was the contents. Every surface, every wall space seemed filled with things. Collections of rocks and shells, bookshelves overflowing with volumes in multiple languages Sarah couldn't even identify, dried plants hanging from ceiling beams, strange artwork that looked both primitive and somehow scientific. A large workbench dominated one corner, covered with papers, magnifying glasses, and what appeared to be bone fragments. It was chaotic, yes, but somehow organized, as if the entire space were the physical manifestation of a brilliant but scattered mind. Sarah stood frozen, taking it all in. This was not what she had expected, not even close. "Close your mouth, girl. You'll catch flies," Eleanor said, hanging her parka on a hook by the door, her voice back to its usual gruff tone. The central space was dominated by a large wood stove, radiating a blessed, powerful heat. Eleanor immediately went to work, stoking the fire higher, the movements of her weathered hands efficient and practiced. "Sit," she instructed, pointing to a worn but comfortable-looking armchair near the stove. Sarah sank into it gratefully, the tension in her shoulders finally beginning to ease. She unwrapped Lily from her outer blanket. The baby's cheeks were red from the cold, her tiny nose running. Without being asked, Eleanor disappeared into what must have been the homestead kitchen area. She returned minutes later with a bottle of warm formula. "How did you—" Sarah began, staring at the bottle in disbelief. "Figured that's what she'd need," Eleanor said with a shrug, as if producing warm formula in the middle of a blizzard in a cabin in the Alaskan wilderness was the most natural thing in the world. Been a while, but some things you don't forget. As Sarah fed Lily, the simple, rhythmic act grounding her amidst the strangeness, she felt a maternal instinct intertwine with her exhaustion. Eleanor disappeared again. This time, when she returned, she was carrying what looked like an actual wooden drawer, one she had lined with soft blankets. "Makeshift crib," she explained, setting it down near the stove. "Babies sleep better with solid sides around them. Feels secure." Sarah stared at her, a new wave of questions forming. How did this eccentric scientist, living alone in the wilderness, know so much about caring for a baby, I've known many beginnings and endings. Child, Eleanor said, her expression flickering with a shadow of something Sarah couldn't quite decipher. Before Sarah could ask what that meant, Eleanor was already moving again, gathering supplies. She returned with a towel, some clothes that looked well worn but clean, and a bar of soap. "Bathroom's through there," she said, nodding to a door. "Water's hot if you're quick. Generators working overtime in this storm." Only then did Sarah realize how disheveled she must look and smell. She hadn't showered properly since leaving the Jennings family home that morning. The thought of clean clothes, of washing away the grime and the emotional weight of the day, was incredibly appealing. "I can watch the little one," Eleanor offered, seeing her hesitation. "Been a while, but I haven't forgotten how to hold a baby." Trusting this strange woman with Lily seemed inadvisable by any rational standard, and yet there was something about Eleanor Vance that inspired confidence, a competence in her movements, a directness in her gaze that spoke of someone who had seen much of life and knew how to handle its challenges. It wasn't the polished assurance her parents valued, but something deeper, more rooted. Could this chaotic, strange place truly be a safe haven in that moment, surrounded by the blizzard and the scent of pine and something earthy? Sarah decided it had to be. "Her name is Lily," Sarah said softly, carefully transferring the now calm, warm baby into Eleanor's arms. Trust bloomed in her chest, fragile but real. Eleanor settled into the armchair Sarah had vacated, the worn fabric creaking slightly. "Lily," she repeated softly, the name a gentle whisper on her lips. "Hello there, little lily flower." Watching the gruff, eccentric woman cradle her daughter with such unexpected tenderness sent another wave of warmth through Sarah, this one deeper than the heat from the stove. It was the warmth of seeing her child accepted, cherished, even by a complete stranger. The shower was glorious. The hot water, a luxury she hadn't had since fleeing her parents' house, washed away not just the physical grime, but some of the heavy emotional weight of the past few days. Dressed in the borrowed clothes, too large, but wonderfully soft and clean, Sarah emerged to find Eleanor singing softly to Lily. It was an old folk song Sarah had never heard before, about mountains and rivers, sung in a low, melodic voice that was surprisingly soothing. "There's food on the table," Eleanor said without looking up, still gently rocking Lily. "Nothing fancy, soup and bread." Sarah hadn't realized how truly hungry she was until that moment. The soup, some kind of hearty vegetable and barley concoction, tasted better than anything she could remember eating. As she ate, she surveyed the cabin more carefully, the initial shock giving way to a quiet fascination. One wall was entirely covered with photographs, mostly of Eleanor in various remote locations. Always alone, often with scientific equipment. She looked younger in the photos, perhaps in her 30s or 40s, but just as intense, just as present. A professor of Arctic biology at a university in Fairbanks for 20 years. Benjamin Carter would later tell Sarah, retired early to do her own research. The images hinted at a life of rigorous study and solitary exploration, a stark contrast to the domestic scene Sarah was now a part of. Another thing caught Sarah's attention, a small door, different from the homestead washroom or what appeared to be Eleanor's bedroom. It was painted a soft, almost faded blue, and it had a hand-lettered sign tacked to it. "Eleanor's room, keep out." Sarah's curiosity, a trait often stifled in her previous life, stirred. "Who's Eleanor?" she asked before she could stop herself, the question slipping out on a breath. Eleanor's hand stilled momentarily as she was tucking a blanket around Lily in her makeshift drawer crib. The air in the cabin seemed to drop 10 degrees, the warmth from the stove suddenly less potent. Her face became a carved mask, unreadable, guarded. "No one you need to concern yourself with," she answered, her voice suddenly flat, devoid of the warmth it held moments before when singing to Lily. The transformation was immediate and absolute. "You'll sleep there tonight," she added, pointing to a daybed in the corner of the main room. "I'm through that door. I sleep light. So, call if you need anything." The abrupt change in subject, the definitive tone, was a clear boundary. Eleanor was not a topic for discussion. As Eleanor prepared for bed, moving around the cabin with the quiet efficiency of long-established routines. She paused by Sarah's makeshift bed. "Just until the storm passes," she said, though something in her eyes, a knowing look, a hint of resignation, suggested she understood it might be longer. "The forecast says 3 days of this weather, maybe more." "Thank you," Sarah said again, genuinely grateful despite the strangeness of it all. "I don't know what we would have done if you hadn't stopped." Eleanor's expression softened slightly, the brief hardness fading. "Get some sleep, girl. Tomorrow's another day." Later, as Sarah lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to Lily's soft breathing and the relentless howling wind outside, she wondered about the twist of fate that had brought them to this place. The day had begun with her world falling apart, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. Yet here they were, safe, warm, and somehow found by perhaps the only person strange enough and kind enough to take in a teenage mother and baby during a blizzard without question. But always. Her gaze drifted back to the blue door with its warning sign. Who was Eleanor and what had happened to make Eleanor Vance? A woman who clearly knew how to care for babies, live alone in the Alaskan wilderness, surrounded by scientific specimens, and a room that felt like a carefully preserved secret. A wondering thought persisted as sleep finally claimed her. Who was Eleanor? And what sadness lay behind that closed door? The mystery of that room, quiet and imposing in the corner of the cabin, seemed to hold the key to understanding the complex. Guarded woman who had so unexpectedly offered them refuge. Days blur into a week as the storm rages, forcing two disparate souls into a shared rhythm of survival, work, and quiet observation. The generator hummed a steady, reassuring tune, a testament to Eleanor's preparedness and the fragile bubble of warmth and safety they inhabited. Outside, the blizzard continued its relentless assault, but inside the Vance homestead, a new kind of life was taking shape. It wasn't the life Sarah had ever imagined, but it was life, and for the first time in a long time, it felt stable. Eleanor Vance, the eccentric scientist, proved to be an unexpectedly patient, if unconventional, teacher. Her gruff exterior remained, but beneath it was a deep well of knowledge and a practical approach to survival that Sarah found herself absorbing like a thirsty sponge. "I'm not running a hotel," Eleanor announced on the second morning, handing Sarah a broom. "Everyone works here." It wasn't a demand, just a statement of fact, a simple rule for coexisting in this isolated world. Sarah, who had grown up in a household where tasks were often assigned based on appearance rather than necessity, found a strange liberation in the practicality of life with Eleanor. There was no pretense here. If something needed doing, you did it. She learned to maintain the wood stove, a skill far removed from anything she'd learned in her suburban life. Eleanor explained the different types of wood and how they burned: pine, hot and fast, good for getting things going; birch, lasting longer, giving a steady heat. "You always want a mix," she'd say, demonstrating how to arrange the logs, her weathered hands moving with practiced ease. When she wasn't tending to Lily, Sarah helped with chores around the cabin. She learned that Eleanor's peculiar collections weren't just random eccentricities, they had purpose. The rocks were geological specimens, carefully categorized. The dried plants were both medicinal and for research. And the bones. The bones belonged to various Arctic animals Eleanor had been studying for years, silent witnesses to the changing ecosystem. "You're a scientist?" Sarah asked one day, as they preserved vegetables from the homestead root cellar, a cool, earthy-smelling space filled with jars of canned goods. The question felt almost too simple, too obvious, given her surroundings. And yet, it needed to be asked. Eleanor paused in her expert slicing of carrots. Depends who you ask." A wry smile touched her lips. "Professor of Arctic biology at the university in Fairbanks for 20 years. Retired early to do my own research." What kind of research? Sarah was genuinely curious. This was a world so vastly different from anything she'd known. Climate effects on Arctic ecosystems. Changes in plant cycles, animal migrations. Eleanor gestured towards her workbench, the piles of papers and specimens suddenly seeming even more significant. Been documenting it for 3 decades now. Changes that took centuries are happening in decades. Her voice grew serious, losing its earlier lightness. Nobody wanted to hear it back then, and now they're listening, but it's almost too late. She handed Sarah another carrot. Thinner slices, they'll dry better. It was a subtle shift, a glimpse into the passion and frustration that lay beneath the surface. Sarah found herself drawn into Eleanor's world, learning about the delicate balance of the Arctic environment, the interconnectedness of everything from the smallest plant to the largest animal. It was a different kind of knowledge than she'd expected to gain from her rescuer, but it felt important, grounding. On the 4th day, the satellite communicator rang, a startling, intrusive sound in the otherwise quiet cabin. Eleanor answered with terse responses, mostly yes and no. Finally, "We're fine. Benjamin, don't risk the trip yet." Benjamin Carter, the man who brought supplies. "Benjamin brings supplies sometimes," Eleanor explained after hanging up. "Good man. One of the few people I can tolerate for more than an hour." Sarah tried calling her friend Chloe in Anchorage on the satellite communicator, but the connection was spotty, the words breaking in and out. She managed to learn that her parents had told everyone she was away at a special school, their euphemism, she knew, for erasing her from their lives. The confirmation stung, a sharp reminder of the rejection she had faced. Yet, even as the hurt settled, a quiet resolve began to form. They might try to erase her past, but they couldn't erase her future. As the days passed, a new kind of rhythm settled over the Vance homestead. Sarah tended to Lily, fed the fire, helped with chores, and listened. She listened to the wind, to the crackling of the stove, to Eleanor's quiet mutterings about the weather patterns or the behavior of the ravens outside. She was learning not just how to survive in the wilderness, but how to observe, how to be present. An unspoken realization began to form for Sarah. Freedom isn't just escaping something, but having the strength to build something new. It was a slow, subtle shift, like the imperceptible changes Eleanor documented in the Arctic. But it was happening. She was beginning to build something here, piece by piece, in the most unexpected of places, the outside world. A source of both pain and unresolved conflict finds a way in, bringing news and a fragile connection to the life Sarah left behind. Days turned into a week, and the storm, their unlikely protector, finally began to relent. The fierce winds lessened, the heavy snowfall turned to a gentle flurry, and a sense of anticipation settled over the Vance homestead. Benjamin Carter was due to arrive. He was their link to the world beyond the snow-laden trees. A world Sarah had fled, but that still held pieces of her past. When the sound of a snowmobile engine finally cut through the quiet, Sarah felt a jolt of anxiety mixed with a strange excitement. Through the window, she saw a man in heavy winter gear, pulling a small sled loaded with supplies. Benjamin, he was not what Sarah had expected. Based on Eleanor's brief, gruff descriptions, she'd pictured someone equally weathered and solitary. Instead, Benjamin Carter was native Alaskan, perhaps in his 50s, with laugh lines around his kind eyes and a quiet, thoughtful manner that seemed to balance Eleanor's intensity. He moved with an unhurried grace, his presence immediately calming. "So, you're the guest Eleanor mentioned," he said, his deep voice warm, as he removed his gloves to greet them. "Benjamin Carter. I teach at the high school in Willow Creek when I'm not making deliveries to hermits in the woods." "Who are you calling a hermit?" Eleanor grumbled, but there was no real heat in it, just a familiar back and forth that spoke of a long-standing, comfortable relationship. "Did you bring the coffee?" Eleanor pressed, her priorities clear. 2 pounds, dark roast," Benjamin confirmed, a smile touching his lips. "And something else you'll appreciate." He reached into his pack and pulled out a small, stuffed polar bear toy. "For the little one. My wife insisted." Lily, secured in a makeshift carrier Eleanor had fashioned, blinked at the toy with fascination, her tiny hands reaching for it. "Your wife has good taste," Sarah said, genuinely touched by the unexpected kindness. "Thank you." As they unloaded supplies, Benjamin and Eleanor fell into what was clearly a familiar routine. They moved around each other with the ease of long acquaintance, communicating in half sentences and knowing glances. It was clear they had a deep respect for one another, a bond forged in the quiet solitude of the Alaskan wilderness. Later, over steaming cups of coffee, which Eleanor declared almost adequate, Benjamin brought news from Willow Creek. The storm had been the worst in years, causing power outages and property damage. Schools had been closed for a week. The community hall is still serving as a shelter for those who lost power, he mentioned, watching Sarah carefully. They have resources for people who need temporary assistance. The implication was clear. There were options for Sarah and Lily if they wanted to leave: shelters, social workers, a path back to a more conventional system. Sarah's heart quickened. Was this it? The moment she had to decide? Before Sarah could respond, Eleanor cut in, her voice firm. The girl and her baby can stay here until she figures out her next move. No need for shelters and social workers poking into her business. Benjamin raised an eyebrow, a silent question in his eyes. That's generous of you, Eleanor. It's practical, she countered, though the slightest softening around her eyes betrayed a different motivation. I've got the space. She helps with chores. The baby's no trouble. Sarah felt a surge of relief, followed quickly by uncertainty. Eleanor was offering continued shelter, a lifeline in the storm's aftermath. But was it what was best for Lily? Living in this remote cabin with an eccentric older woman might not be the most stable environment for a baby. Not in the eyes of the world Sarah came from, or the world Benjamin represented. And yet, in the past week, Lily had thrived. Sarah had learned more about practical care from Eleanor than from all the parenting books she'd secretly read. And despite Eleanor's gruff exterior, there was a genuine kindness beneath, a quiet competence that felt more reliable than the fragile support systems she'd known before. If you're sure it's not an imposition, Sarah said carefully. The words, a tightrope walk between gratitude and a nascent desire for independence. We'd be grateful to stay a little longer, just until I can make a proper plan. Eleanor nodded once, as if the matter were settled. Benjamin watched this exchange with thoughtful eyes, saying nothing but observing everything. Before leaving, he took Sarah aside while Eleanor was organizing the supplies. Eleanor doesn't let people in easily, he said quietly, his voice gentle but serious. She must see something in you and your daughter. He paused, glancing towards the mysterious blue door before looking back at Sarah. She's been very kind despite her tough exterior. Benjamin smiled slightly, a knowing, compassionate expression. She's had her share of hardships, made her prickly, but also compassionate in her own way. He gestured subtly towards the blue door. Be patient with her. There are old wounds there. His words confirmed Sarah's intuition about the room and about Eleanor. They also offered a glimpse into the complex woman who had rescued them, a woman whose kindness was perhaps born from her own deep pain. A quiet question forms in Sarah's mind. Could there ever be a way back to the life she lost? Or was it truly gone forever, as Benjamin's snowmobile disappeared down the trail, leaving them once again enveloped in the cabin's quiet? Sarah knew the answer wasn't simple. The storm was over, but the journey was far from finished. When Lily falls ill, the eccentric scientist reveals a different kind of knowledge, a deep, intuitive understanding of caregiving that surprises and reassures the young mother. The quiet rhythm of life at the Vance homestead, a rhythm dictated by the needs of the wood stove, the weather, and Lily, had settled in. Sarah was growing more comfortable, more capable, finding a nascent sense of confidence in her ability to contribute, to be part of this unexpected household. But the world of a new mother is always precarious, balanced on the fragile health of her child. On the fifth night, the stillness of the cabin was broken by the sound no parent ever wants to hear, a baby's distressed cry that signals something is wrong. Lily had developed a slight fever. Sarah's heart leaped into her throat. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her newfound calm. She reached for Lily, her hands trembling as she felt the heat radiating from the baby's small body. In that moment, all her insecurities rushed back. She was so young, so inexperienced. What did she know about caring for a sick baby in the middle of nowhere? Eleanor, sensing the change in the air, was instantly by her side. There was no gruffness now, only a quiet, focused intensity. "Let me see," she said, her voice calm and steady, a stark contrast to Sarah's rising panic. She gently took Lily, her weathered hands surprisingly soft and sure as she examined the baby. She felt Lily's forehead, checked her breathing, observed the subtle signs Sarah hadn't known to look for. "Babies get fevers," Eleanor stated, her voice matter of fact. "It's how their bodies fight." She didn't dismiss Sarah's worry, but she didn't indulge the panic either. It was a practical observation, grounded in experience. "Not dangerously high," she murmured, more to herself than Sarah, her brow furrowed slightly in concentration. Probably just adjusting to the new environment. Despite the reassurance, Sarah watched anxiously. This was her baby, her responsibility. But she also recognized, with a reluctant honesty, that Eleanor possessed a knowledge Sarah hadn't yet acquired, a knowledge that came not from books or classes, but from a different kind of learning, honed by a different kind of life. Eleanor moved towards the homestead kitchen area, her movements purposeful. She returned with a small pot of water and a handful of something that smelled like mint. She heated the water on the wood stove, the fragrant steam filling the air. "Helps open the airways," she explained, pouring the warm, mint-infused water into a small basin. She prepared a lukewarm bath for Lily, testing the temperature carefully with her elbow. Sarah watched, a mixture of fear and awe swirling within her. She had read about lukewarm baths for fevers, but seeing Eleanor, this unconventional scientist, perform the task with such quiet competence was different. It was a practical application of knowledge, seamlessly integrated into the rhythm of their isolated life. Gently, Eleanor bathed Lily, her hands moving with a surprising tenderness. She spoke softly to the baby, murmuring words Sarah couldn't quite hear, a low, soothing murmur that seemed to calm Lily. Sarah saw a glimpse of the person Eleanor might have been in different circumstances, a person capable of immense gentleness and care. They sat by the wood stove for the rest of the night, taking turns holding Lily, monitoring her temperature. Eleanor shared quiet observations about the stars visible through the window, about the way the wind changed direction, about the subtle signs of the coming dawn. She didn't offer platitudes or empty comforts, just her quiet presence and her steady knowledge. By morning, Lily's fever had broken. She woke up looking brighter, her eyes clearer, the color returning to her cheeks. Sarah felt a wave of overwhelming relief, so strong it brought tears to her eyes. "She's better," she whispered, the simple words inadequate to express the depth of her gratitude. "Natural remedies work when you know what you're doing," Eleanor said with a shrug, as if healing a baby in the wilderness was just another aspect of her scientific research. Modern medicine has its place, but people survive for thousands of years before antibiotics. Sarah looked at Eleanor, at the lines etched on her face, at the depth in her silver eyes. She was a woman of science, yes, but also a woman of instinct, of lived experience. She had a connection to the natural world, to ancient knowledge, that Sarah had never encountered before. Eleanor Vance was a paradox, a solitary scientist surrounded by the remnants of a past life, who could nevertheless offer practical, life-saving care with the tenderness of a seasoned mother. An inner realization settled in Sarah. Perhaps true wisdom comes not just from books, but from a lifetime of both knowledge and lived experience. And in that moment, sitting in the warm cabin with her healthy baby, Sarah knew she was learning from a true master of both. As the storm finally breaks, revealing a world transformed by sunlight, the unspoken question hangs in the air. What comes next when sanctuary is no longer defined by the weather? Days turned into a week, then more. And the blizzard that had trapped them in the Vance homestead, their unexpected sanctuary, finally began to lose its fury. The relentless wind lessened. The heavy snow gave way to a gentle, almost whimsical flurry. And one morning, the cabin was bathed in an ethereal glow. The storm had broken. Sunshine, weak but glorious, spilled through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air and casting the cabin in a warm, golden light. Outside, the snow sparkled like a million scattered diamonds, a breathtaking, crystalline world stretching as far as the eye could see. The immediate danger had passed, the biting cold, the impenetrable snow, the feeling of being utterly cut off from the world. All were gone, replaced by a fragile, sunlit peace. But with the breaking of the storm came the return of a different kind of chill, the cold reality of the future. "Benjamin will make it through tomorrow," Eleanor announced after checking something on a weather radio. Its crackle a jarring sound after the quiet hum of the generator and the roar of the wind. "He'll bring supplies and news." The unspoken question hung in the air between them, heavy and unavoidable. What would Sarah do now? The storm had been a temporary suspension of reality, a crisis that demanded only immediate survival. But now, the future loomed, uncertain and daunting. She still had nowhere to go. Not really. The Vance homestead was a haven, yes, but it wasn't her home. And while Eleanor had offered continued shelter, Sarah knew she couldn't stay indefinitely. A perpetual guest relying on the kindness of a stranger, no matter how profound that kindness had been. That evening, as Lily slept peacefully in her makeshift drawer crib, which Eleanor, with her surprising practicality, had improved with small wooden rails, Sarah found the courage to voice the question that had been weighing on her mind. She had noticed them almost immediately upon arriving. The journals. They filled an entire bookshelf, leather-bound volumes spanning decades. What secrets did they hold? "Are those your research notes?" Sarah asked, gesturing towards the bookshelf. Eleanor was knitting something with multiple colors of yarn, her fingers moving with practiced ease. She nodded, not looking up from her work. "Partly observations, thoughts, data. I've documented every weather pattern, plant growth cycle, and animal sighting on this land since 1983. Would it be okay if I looked at one?" The request felt bold, an intrusion on Eleanor's private world, but Sarah's curiosity was stronger than her reticence. Eleanor's knitting needles stilled. The cabin fell silent, the only sound the gentle purring of the wood stove. Then, with a slight nod, she said, "The green ones are purely scientific. The brown ones are personal. Stick to the green." Sarah carefully selected a journal, its leather cover worn smooth with age and use. She opened it to a random page, her breath catching slightly. It was filled with Eleanor's precise, elegant handwriting. Detailed drawings of plants, intricate charts tracking temperatures and precipitation, and observations so meticulous, so deeply felt. They bordered on poetry. This was not just data. This was a life's work, a passionate connection to the natural world. "This is amazing," Sarah said honestly, genuinely impressed. "You should publish this." Eleanor snorted, a sound that was surprisingly devoid of humor. "I did, for years. Academic journals, research papers. Then I stopped. Why, got tired of committees and peer reviews and university politics. Science shouldn't be about whose name is on the paper or who gets funding. It should be about truth." She resumed her knitting, the needles clicking rhythmically. "Out here, I answer to no one. Research is pure." Sarah flipped through more pages, pausing at a detailed drawing of a flower, its structure rendered with scientific accuracy and artistic beauty. "This is beautiful. I didn't know scientists could draw like this." "In the old days, all scientists were artists too," Eleanor replied, her voice softening slightly. "Da Vinci, Audubon, Darwin, they observed, and they created. Modern specialization has made us forget that science and art are just different ways of seeing the same world." As Sarah returned the journal to its shelf, her gaze drifted once more to the blue door. In the 10 days she had been here, she had explored every part of the cabin, every collection, every corner, except the one guarded by that "keep out" sign. Her curiosity, initially a quiet hum, had grown into a persistent thrumming. Benjamin's words about old wounds echoed in her mind. She felt a pull towards the mystery, a sense that understanding what lay behind that door was somehow important to understanding Eleanor, and, perhaps, to understanding the nature of grief and healing itself. A silent prayer formed in Sarah's mind, please. Let there be a path forward, even if she couldn't see it yet. The storm had ended, but the real navigation was just beginning. Drawn by an irresistible pull, a boundary is crossed, and the carefully guarded secret behind the blue door is finally revealed. The fragile peace that settled over the Vance homestead after the storm was a welcome relief, but the quiet also amplified the persistent question in Sarah's mind: what lay behind the blue door? The keep out sign seemed less a prohibition and more an invitation to a mystery, a silent challenge. Benjamin Carter's words, "There are old wounds there," echoed in her thoughts, adding a layer of melancholy to the enigma. Sarah knew it wasn't her place, that she was a guest here, reliant on Eleanor's unpredictable generosity. But the longer she stayed, the more she felt a pull, a need to understand the woman who had saved them, to understand the source of the deep sadness that occasionally surfaced in her eyes. December deepened, wrapping the cabin in a thicker blanket of snow and plunging them into the long, dark Alaskan winter. Life settled into a routine dictated by the limited daylight and the constant need to manage their resources. Sarah's 18th birthday passed with little fanfare, just a small cake Eleanor somehow produced and a handmade card from Lily, featuring the baby's inky footprint. It wasn't the kind of celebration she was used to, but it was marked by a quiet affection that felt more genuine than many of her previous, more elaborate birthdays. Benjamin visited regularly, his snowmobile tracks a welcome sign in the snow. He brought supplies, news from Willow Creek, and stories about the high school where he taught history and traditional knowledge. Through him, Sarah began to glimpse the broader community beyond the cabin, a world of interconnected lives and shared experiences. "The school has a good program for young parents," he mentioned one evening, his gaze thoughtful. "Several students continue their education while raising children." Sarah's heart quickened. The thought of returning to school, of continuing her education, which had felt so abruptly cut short, was a possibility she hadn't dared to entertain. How would that even work, she wondered aloud. I can't exactly show up at a new school with a baby and no guardian. Benjamin and Eleanor exchanged a look that Sarah couldn't quite interpret, a silent communication that seemed to hold a hidden meaning. "There are ways," Benjamin said carefully. "If you were interested." The conversation shifted, but the seed of an idea had been planted in Sarah's mind. Maybe, just maybe, her education wasn't over. January brought the coldest temperatures yet, testing the limits of their sanctuary. The generator, their lifeline to heat and light, strained against the demands. Eleanor monitored it constantly, making small adjustments, murmuring affectionately to the machine. "Old beast, just a few more weeks." "You can do it." It was a constant reminder of their dependence on technology in this harsh environment, a fragile barrier against the unforgiving cold. One particularly brutal night, with temperatures dipping well below -30, the inevitable happened. The generator sputtered, coughed, and died with a final, mournful whine. "Damn," Eleanor said, her voice surprisingly calm despite the crisis. "Knew this was coming." The cabin grew steadily colder as the heating system failed. The wood stove provided heat for the main room, a circle of warmth in the encroaching cold, but the bedrooms quickly became uninhabitable. "We'll all sleep near the stove tonight," Eleanor decided, her mind already working on a solution. They dragged mattresses into the main area, creating a huddle of blankets and pillows near the radiating heat. "Body heat and proximity to fire will keep us warm enough until morning. I can fix it then." As they prepared for a cold night, Eleanor instructed Sarah to find extra blankets. "Check the trunk by my bed and the storage cabinet in the bathroom." With Lily securely bundled in a nest of blankets near the stove, Sarah went in search of more warm coverings. The trunk yielded several quilts, which she carried back to the main room. The storage cabinet in the homestead washroom offered towels, but no blankets. Running out of options and feeling the biting cold begin to creep into her bones, Sarah remembered seeing a chest in Eleanor's room, a large, dark wooden chest she hadn't checked. She hesitated. That room was off limits, a place of secrets and sorrow. But Lily was cold, and they needed blankets. The need to protect her daughter outweighed the instruction on the blue door. She slipped into Eleanor's bedroom, the air noticeably colder than the main room. Inside the chest were wool blankets, thick and warm, and something else. A leather-bound book, different from Eleanor's journals. When she moved it aside to reach the blankets beneath, the book fell open, revealing a hollowed-out center, and inside that center, nestled on faded velvet lining, was a key, a small brass key with a blue ribbon tied to it. Sarah stared at it, her heart pounding in her chest like a drum against the silence. She knew, with a certainty that went beyond reason. What door this key would open. The blue door, Eleanor's sanctuary. She should have just taken the blankets and closed the chest. She should have respected Eleanor's privacy, her clear boundaries. But the mystery of Eleanor's room had grown in her mind over these months, fueled by Benjamin's words and Eleanor's guardedness. And now, with the key literally in her hands, curiosity, a powerful, irresistible force, overwhelmed caution. A soft, almost inaudible whisper escaped Sarah's lips, so much love, frozen in time. What was behind that door? She had to know. Taking the key and the blankets, she returned to the main room. Eleanor was busy with the wood stove, her back turned as she arranged logs to maximize heat through the night. "Found these in your bedroom chest," Sarah said, setting down the blankets, her voice betraying none of the turmoil she felt inside. "I'll check if there are more in the storage closet." The storage closet was near Eleanor's sanctuary, a convenient excuse. Heart racing, Sarah moved quickly down the hallway with a flashlight. The blue door seemed to glow slightly in the beam of light, the hand-lettered "Keep Out" sign staring back at her accusingly. She hesitated, her hand trembling as she raised the key to the lock. This felt wrong. This was a violation of trust. And yet, the key turned smoothly, quietly, as if the lock had been regularly maintained despite the prohibition. With a soft creak, the door swung open. Sarah's flashlight beam swept across the small room, and her breath caught in her throat. In the quiet aftermath of revelation, a story is finally told, a tale of love, loss, and the heavy burden of a life lived in isolation. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat. It was a nursery, a perfectly preserved nursery from another time. The walls were painted a soft yellow, decorated with a hand-painted mural of forest animals, somehow still vibrant despite the years. A wooden crib stood in the center, covered with a patchwork quilt and surrounded by stuffed animals, their button eyes seeming to watch her. A rocking chair sat in the corner, a handmade Afghan draped across its back. Shelves lined one wall, filled with children's books from the 1980s, well-loved spines, covers slightly faded. A changing table held neatly stacked, yellowing diapers and tiny baby clothes. It was as if time had stopped in this room decades ago, holding the space in perfect suspension, a bubble of the past untouched by the present. On a small dresser, silver-framed photographs caught the flashlight's beam. Sarah moved closer, her heart pounding with a mixture of awe and a growing, heavy sense of understanding. The largest showed a much younger woman, perhaps in her 30s, holding a newborn baby. Her face, though tired, radiated a joy, a luminous happiness that Sarah had never seen on Eleanor Vance's weathered features. This was not the guarded, gruff woman she knew. This was a woman transformed by love. "Eleanor," Sarah whispered, the name now carrying a profound weight, a dawning, heartbreaking clarity. Yes, Eleanor. Sarah whirled around, nearly dropping the flashlight. Eleanor stood in the doorway, her face unreadable in the dim light filtering in from the main room. Sarah braced herself for anger, for outrage at this invasion of privacy. She had violated a sacred boundary, trespassed on a place of deep, guarded pain. Instead, what crossed Eleanor's features was something far more devastating, a profound, bone-deep sorrow that seemed to age her before Sarah's eyes. "I'm so sorry," Sarah began, the words feeling inadequate, meaningless in the face of the raw grief she saw. Eleanor raised a hand, a small, weary gesture to silence her. "It's done now," she said quietly, her voice stripped bare of its usual gruffness. She stepped into the room, moving with the slow, careful reverence of someone entering a sacred space. Her fingers trailed over the crib rail, a ghostly caress. She straightened a stuffed bear, adjusted the Afghan on the rocking chair, small, automatic gestures that spoke of countless previous visits, a silent ritual of remembrance. "You had a daughter," Sarah said softly. The statement not a question, but an acknowledgement of the heartbreaking truth. Eleanor nodded, picking up the silver-framed photograph. Her fingers traced the edge of the frame, a connection across time. Eleanor Grace Callahan, born the 14th of July, 1986. 3 hours of labor, 7 pounds exactly. Her voice took on a distant, reciting quality, as if recalling facts from one of her scientific journals, a way to hold the emotion at bay. She had my eyes, but her father's smile. Not that he ever saw it. "I'm sorry," Sarah said again, the inadequacy of the words a physical ache in her chest. "I shouldn't have come in here." "No, you shouldn't have." Eleanor sighed, a sound like the wind through dry leaves settling into the rocking chair. The weight of memories seemed to press her deeper into the seat. But perhaps it's time. Secrets have a way of surfacing, like air bubbles under ice. In the main room, Lily made a small sound, stirring in her sleep. Sarah glanced back, torn between her responsibility to her daughter and her desperate need to understand Eleanor's story, this unexpected, tragic layer of the woman who had saved them. "Go," Eleanor said, sensing Sarah's hesitation. "Check on Lily. Make sure she's warm enough. I'll be there shortly." When Sarah returned to the main room, she found Lily still sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the adult dramas unfolding around her. She adjusted the blankets, added another log to the wood stove, its crackling fire a warm counterpoint to the emotional chill she felt. Then she waited. Eleanor emerged from Eleanor's sanctuary several minutes later, carrying the silver-framed photograph and looking older, somehow, than Sarah had ever seen her. She sat heavily on the mattress near the stove, the picture cradled in her weathered hands. "I was 34, she began, without preamble. Her voice was flat now, the emotion carefully banked, the scientist's precision reasserting itself. A promising academic career, tenure track at the university. I specialized in Arctic ecosystems, spent summers doing field research, winters teaching and publishing." She looked up, meeting Sarah's eyes, and for a moment, Sarah saw the fierce intelligence, the unwavering dedication that lay beneath the layers of grief and isolation. "I wasn't married, didn't particularly want to be, but I did want a child. This was the 1980s, she explained, a time when single motherhood by choice wasn't widely accepted, especially not in the conservative world of academia. Women were still fighting to be taken seriously as scientists. Having a baby without a husband was seen by many as career suicide. "So, what did you do?" Sarah asked softly, leaning closer, drawn into the story. "I had a colleague, brilliant botanist, good friend. We had an arrangement for a while. When I got pregnant, he made it clear he wanted no part of parenthood. Fine by me." She paused, her gaze distant, lost in the past. "I never told anyone at the university who the father was. Wore loose clothes. Scheduled my field research to coincide with the later months. When she was 8 months along, she took a sabbatical, supposedly to write a book. I came here," she said, gesturing around the cabin, the Vance homestead. "It belonged to my grandfather originally. I renovated it, prepared the nursery." She looked towards the blue door, read every book on childbirth I could find. And then, on a July night, much like this one, cold, despite the season, Eleanor arrived. "You gave birth alone here?" Sarah could hardly imagine it. Eleanor nodded. "Not the smartest decision, in retrospect. But I was stubborn, convinced I could handle anything. She proved me wrong." A ghost of a smile touched her lips, a fleeting, sad expression. "From the first contraction. Taught me that some forces of nature can't be controlled, only surrendered to." The wood stove crackled, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the wind howled, creating an eerie, mournful backdrop to this unveiling of long-buried pain. "We had 3 beautiful years," Eleanor continued, her voice growing softer, more tender, as she spoke of her daughter. "I took a position at a smaller college, one that didn't ask too many questions about my personal life. We lived in town during the week, came here on weekends and holidays." Eleanor thrived. She was speaking in full sentences before she was 2. Knew the names of a dozen Arctic plants. Could identify bird calls. Eleanor's voice broke slightly, a fragile crack in her carefully constructed composure. She took a deep breath, steadying herself before continuing. "The winter she turned 3. We came here for Christmas. A storm hit, much like the one that brought you to my door." Her eyes were distant now, fixed on a point in the past. Eleanor developed a cough that quickly worsened. By the second day, she had a high fever. I tried everything: cool baths, herbal remedies, the medications I had on hand. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the failing generator. She glanced at Lily, sleeping peacefully, and couldn't imagine the terror Eleanor must have felt. Nothing worked, Eleanor said, her voice flat, toneless. The phone lines were down. The roads were impassable. By the third day, she was struggling to breathe. Her eyes had taken on a glazed, distant look, the horror of the memory playing out behind them. I wrapped her in blankets and tried to make it to town in my truck. We made it 5 miles before getting stuck in a snowdrift. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of unimaginable loss. Sarah couldn't stop her tears. She thought of Lily, of the fragility of life, of how easily their story could have ended differently if Eleanor hadn't driven by that bus stop. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, the words lost in the vastness of Eleanor's pain. The official cause was pneumonia. Eleanor continued, her voice clinical now, as if the only way to tell this story was to distance herself from its emotional core, complicated by an undiagnosed congenital heart defect. The doctors said she would have needed specialized care even if I'd reached the hospital sooner. They said it wasn't my fault. She looked down at the photograph in her hands, her grip tight. But it was my stubbornness, my need to prove I could do everything alone. It cost my daughter her life. "No," Sarah said firmly, her own voice stronger now, filled with a fierce conviction. "You couldn't have known about her heart. You did everything you could." "Did I?" Eleanor's gaze was piercing, seeing right through Sarah's attempt at comfort. "I chose isolation because it was easier than facing judgment. I put my pride above practical considerations. I thought I knew better than everyone else." She shook her head, a slow, weary movement. "After Eleanor died, I abandoned my career, my research, everything. I retreated here, to this cabin. I preserved her room exactly as it was the day we left for the hospital." Her voice cracked again. "For years, I spoke to almost no one." "What changed?" Sarah asked, needing to understand the path that had led Eleanor to her doorstep. "Time," Eleanor said simply. "And Benjamin. His family has lived in this region for generations. He started bringing supplies after finding me half-starved one winter, refused to let me disappear completely." She paused, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "Eventually, I started doing research again, on my terms, outside the academic establishment, found purpose in documenting the changes to this land." She set the photograph carefully on a small table near the mattress. "But I never let anyone into Eleanor's room. Never spoke her name aloud, until tonight." Sarah reached out hesitantly and placed her hand over Eleanor's weathered one. To her surprise, the older woman didn't pull away. Their hands, one young and smooth, the other aged and calloused, met in a gesture of shared vulnerability. "Maybe she sent us to you," Sarah suggested softly. The idea, a fragile thread of hope in the face of such profound sadness. Maybe we were meant to find each other. For a moment, Eleanor's scientific skepticism battled with what might have been hope in her eyes. "I don't believe in such things," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Why did you help us that night?" Sarah pressed, needing to understand the motivation behind the act of salvation. "You could have driven past." Eleanor was silent for a long moment, considering, her gaze drifting towards the blue door. "When I saw you in the snow," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper, holding Lily. "It was like seeing myself, from the outside, from another time, a young woman alone with a baby, facing impossible odds." She shrugged slightly, a small, almost involuntary movement. "I couldn't save my daughter, but perhaps she sent you to me so I could help save yours." The admission hung in the air between them, fragile and profound, a connection forged in shared experience and the echoes of grief. Then, Lily stirred, making small noises that signaled she would soon wake fully, hungry and demanding attention. The moment of raw vulnerability was over, but something had fundamentally changed between them. A soft, almost inaudible whisper escaped Sarah's lips. So much love, frozen in time. This chaotic, strange place was not just a sanctuary from the storm. It was a place where old wounds could begin to heal, where connections could form in the most unexpected ways. Section 11. Just as a fragile new normal begins to take shape, the past arrives on the doorstep, bringing with it complicated emotions and unresolved claims. As they settled in for the night around the wood stove, Lily fed and content between them. Sarah felt a strange sense of rightness. They were an unlikely trio, a teenage mother who had defied expectations, a grieving scientist who had found a fragile path towards healing, and a baby born into uncertainty. Yet, somehow, they fit together. The blizzard had brought them together, and the shared experience of weathering the storm, both external and internal, had forged an unexpected bond. What happens now? Sarah asked into the near darkness, the question encompassing far more than just their immediate plans. Tomorrow, I fix the generator, Eleanor answered pragmatically, her voice a steady anchor. After that, she paused, considering. After that, we make choices, better ones than I made before. It wasn't a promise, not exactly, but it was a declaration of intent, a willingness to look forward rather than remain trapped in the past. As Sarah drifted towards sleep, warmed by the fire and the presence of these two beings who had become her unlikely family, she felt something she hadn't experienced since the day she discovered she was pregnant: hope. Outside, the aurora borealis painted the sky in veils of green and purple, dancing above the cabin, a silent witness to the three souls who had found each other against all odds. Spring came to Edgewood, Alaska, in fits and starts. Snow melted, revealing patches of earth that had been hidden for months. The days lengthened dramatically, sunlight stretching into the evening hours. Birds returned from their southern migrations, filling the forest with song. For Sarah, it was a season of decisions and preparations. Lily was growing rapidly, becoming more alert and engaged with her surroundings. She would need socialization, medical checkups, and, eventually, education. Staying with Eleanor had been necessary during winter, a matter of survival, but spring brought new possibilities and new responsibilities. Eleanor, true to her word, fixed the generator and then turned her attention to more surprising renovations. "If you're staying through spring," she announced one morning in March, her tone matter of fact, "we need to make some proper accommodations." Sarah, feeding Lily at the table, looked up in surprise. "I don't want to impose more than we already have. Eleanor." Eleanor waved away her concern. The drawer crib was fine for an emergency, not suitable for a growing baby. She unrolled a paper on the table, a sketch for a proper crib. "I've got the wood. Benjamin can bring the tools I'm missing." What began as a crib project expanded into a comprehensive renovation of the cabin's sleeping arrangements. The daybed where Sarah had been sleeping was replaced with a real bed. A corner of the main room was transformed into a play area for Lily, complete with a handmade activity mat designed, according to Eleanor, to stimulate cognitive development. Most significantly, the door to Eleanor's sanctuary remained unlocked. Eleanor didn't dismantle the preserved nursery, but she no longer treated it as a sealed shrine. Sometimes Sarah would find her sitting in the rocking chair, holding one of Eleanor's toys, not with the devastating grief of before, but with something closer to bittersweet remembrance. "She would have been 35 this year," Eleanor remarked once, her voice soft. "I wonder what she would have become. A scientist, perhaps, or maybe something entirely different." "Tell me about her," Sarah encouraged, and for the first time in decades, Eleanor began to share stories of Eleanor, her first steps, her favorite books, her habit of categorizing pine cones by size. The telling seemed to bring Eleanor back into the world of the living, transforming her from a frozen memory to a child who had been deeply loved. As the natural world awakened around them, so too did Sarah's thoughts of the future. Benjamin became an unexpected ally in Sarah's tentative planning. During his visits, he brought not just supplies, but information about the local high school's program for young parents, about medical resources in Willow Creek, about potential paths forward. "The spring semester starts in 2 weeks, he mentioned in April. "If you're interested, we could arrange for you to finish your senior year, part remote learning, part in person. I could drive you when I come into Willow Creek." "Is that even possible?" Sarah asked, her mind reeling with the implications. I don't have my records, and legally. Let me worry about the bureaucracy, Benjamin said with a slight smile. I've been teaching there for 20 years. I have some influence. And Lily. What would I do with her while in class? Benjamin glanced at Eleanor, who was pretending not to listen as she recorded observations in one of her journals. I think you might already have a willing child care provider, he suggested quietly. That evening, after Lily was asleep, Sarah approached Eleanor with the idea. She expected resistance, or at least practical objections. Instead, Eleanor's response surprised her. It's about time you thought about your education, she said, not looking up from her journal. Babies are important. So is knowledge. You'd really be willing to watch Lily while I'm at school? Sarah asked, hardly believing it could be this simple. Eleanor finally looked up, her expression serious. I've been observing you for months now. Sarah, you're a good mother, attentive, patient, intuitive, but you're also clearly intelligent, with an analytical mind. Abandoning your education would be a waste. It was perhaps the most direct compliment Eleanor had ever given her. Sarah felt a flush of pride, quickly followed by the familiar weight of practical concerns. But there are so many complications. I don't have legal guardianship established. I don't have health insurance for Lily. I don't even have my birth certificate or school records. Paperwork, Eleanor dismissed with a wave of her hand. Bureaucratic hurdles, nothing that can't be overcome with the right approach. The right approach turned out to involve a series of steps Sarah would never have imagined possible. First, with Benjamin's help, Eleanor contacted a lawyer in Anchorage who specialized in family law. After a lengthy conference call, a plan emerged. We need to establish legal guardianship, the lawyer explained. Given that you're 18, Sarah, you have legal autonomy for yourself. But having an adult guardian who can act in your interests for matters like school enrollment will simplify things. Eleanor, to Sarah's continued surprise, volunteered immediately. I can be her guardian, temporary or permanent, whatever works best. The process required documentation, birth certificates, school records, evidence of Sarah's living situation. Some of these they obtained through official channels. Others required more. Creative solutions, including a trip to the Jennings family home while her parents were at work to retrieve essential documents she'd hidden before her departure, standing on the doorstep of the house she'd grown up in, using the spare key still hidden under a fake rock. Sarah felt like a thief in her own past. The home seemed smaller than she remembered, the carefully curated decor more sterile than comforting. She moved quickly, retrieving her birth certificate from its hiding place in her old desk, along with school records and the baby book she'd started for Lily. As she was leaving, she noticed something on the mantel, a family photograph with her face cut out, as if she had never existed. The visual confirmation of her erasure stung more than she expected. On impulse, she left behind the sonogram image of Lily she'd carried in her wallet, placing it exactly where her face had been removed from the family portrait. Let them remember what they chose to throw away, she thought, as she closed the door behind her. By May, the legal arrangements were in place. Eleanor became Sarah's temporary guardian, allowing her to enroll in the high school's flexible program for the final weeks of the semester. The arrangement was unusual enough to raise eyebrows, but with Benjamin's advocacy and the school's desire to support teen parents, exceptions were made. 3 days a week, Benjamin would drive Sarah to Willow Creek on his way to work. She would attend essential classes, meet with teachers about remote assignments, and return to the cabin in the afternoon. The other days, she would study from home, with Eleanor surprisingly stepping into the role of tutor for science and mathematics. Your textbook is outdated, Eleanor remarked, flipping through Sarah's biology materials. The sections on ecological systems don't reflect current research at all. Here, use these instead. She provided several books from her personal library, adding, just because you're learning remotely doesn't mean you should receive an inferior education. Lily, meanwhile, thrived under Eleanor's care. During school hours, the woman who had once lived in isolated grief transformed into an engaged, if unconventional, caregiver. She created natural toys from wood and fabric, read scientific journals aloud to the baby, as if she could understand complex ecological concepts, and took her on field expeditions around the property, pointing out plants and wildlife with scientific accuracy. "You're teaching a 7-month-old about photosynthesis," Sarah asked one day, returning from school to find Eleanor showing Lily the interior structure of a leaf. "Early exposure to scientific concepts enhances neural development," Eleanor replied matter-of-factly. "Besides, she seems to enjoy the colors and textures." Indeed, Lily was reaching for the leaf with evident fascination, her small face alight with a curiosity that mirrored Eleanor's own expression. Spring edged toward summer, bringing finals week and a decision point. Sarah had completed enough credits to graduate, barely, and with considerable effort. But what came next remained uncertain. The temporary guardianship would expire soon, requiring either renewal or a new arrangement altogether. On a warm June evening, as they sat on the cabin's porch watching the sunset, which now came near midnight in the Alaskan summer, Eleanor brought up the subject directly. "You'll need to decide soon," she said, her eyes on the golden-pink horizon. "Fall semester applications for the community college are due next month." Sarah bounced Lily gently on her knee, buying time to organize her thoughts. The baby was sitting up independently now, reaching for everything within grasp, her personality emerging more clearly each day. "I've been thinking about it," she admitted. "College seems impossible with Lily. But staying here indefinitely isn't a long-term solution either." "Why not?" Eleanor asked, surprising her. "This cabin has housed 3 generations of my family. It could house yours as well." The offer hung in the air between them, momentous in its implications. Before Sarah could respond, Eleanor continued. "The university in Fairbanks has a program for student parents, childcare subsidies, family housing, flexible class schedules. You could study environmental science, biology, or whatever interests you." She gestured toward the forest spreading below them. "This land will still be here on weekends and holidays." Sarah stared at her, struggling to comprehend what she was hearing. "Are you saying you want us to stay permanently?" Eleanor shifted uncomfortably, clearly fighting her natural reticence. "I'm saying you have options, more than you might think." She reached into her pocket and withdrew an envelope. "This came for you yesterday." The envelope bore Sarah's name and the cabin's address, the first mail she had received since arriving. Inside was a letter from Chloe, her former best friend. "Your parents finally told people the truth," Chloe wrote. "Not by choice. Someone from church saw you at the Willow Creek Mercantile with Lily. There's been drama, obviously. Your mom called me crying, asking if I knew where you were staying. I didn't tell her anything specific, just that you were safe." The letter continued with updates about their old friends, school events Sarah had missed, and finally, "Whatever you decide, I've got your back. This time, I should have done more when your parents kicked you out. I'm sorry." Attached was a note with David and Martha Jennings' new phone number. They had apparently changed it after she left. "They want to reconcile," Sarah said, her voice hollow. "At least, my mom does." Eleanor's expression remained neutral. "That's one option," she said carefully. "You could return to your previous life, or—" She hesitated, her gaze sweeping over Sarah and Lily. "Or you could continue building the new one you've started here." Before Sarah could respond, the satellite communicator rang from inside the cabin, an unusual occurrence in the evening. Eleanor went to answer it, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and the setting sun. When Eleanor returned, her expression was grim. That was Benjamin. He had an unexpected visitor at his house today. A young man asking questions about the teenage girl with the baby who supposedly lives out near his teaching route. Sarah's heart stuttered. "Did he give a name?" "Mark Williams," Eleanor said. "He's been looking for you since he discovered through social media that you'd had his baby." Mark Williams, Lily's father, the college freshman who had blocked her number when she told him about the pregnancy. Now, suddenly, interested in finding them. "What did Benjamin tell him?" Sarah asked, holding Lily closer instinctively. "Nothing specific, but the boy was persistent. Benjamin thinks he may have followed him part of the way here today. Might show up tomorrow." The news landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through the tentative peace Sarah had found. Mark's reappearance complicated everything. He had legal rights as Lily's father, rights that could disrupt all their carefully laid plans. "What do I do?" she asked, suddenly feeling again young, scared, overwhelmed by adult decisions. Eleanor sat back in her chair, her face thoughtful. "That depends on what you want, Sarah, not what Mark wants, not what your parents want, not even what I want." Her gaze was steady, clear. "What future do you envision for yourself and Lily?" The question hung between them as the sunset faded and the long Alaskan twilight began. Lily, oblivious to the adult complexity swirling around her, reached for a dragonfly hovering near the porch railing, her face alight with wonder. Faced with competing visions for her future, the young mother finds her voice and chooses a path that honors her own growth and the unconventional family she has found. The next morning brought exactly what they had anticipated Mark's arrival: his car, a sleek, dark sedan that looked out of place on the long, unpaved driveway, appeared around noon. The unfamiliar engine sound alerting them before he came into view, Eleanor had prepared for this moment with characteristic thoroughness. "You don't have to speak to him if you don't want to," she reminded Sarah, her voice low and firm. "This is private property. He has no right here without invitation." But Sarah had made her decision during the night, after hours of wrestling with her fears and her hopes for Lily's future. "I need to face him," she said, her voice steady. "For Lily's sake." Mark Williams stepped out of his car, looking nothing like the boy who had charmed Sarah at a party almost 2 years ago. He was thinner, more serious, his collegiate sweatshirt and neat haircut creating the image of responsible young adulthood. When he saw Sarah standing on the porch with Lily in her arms, he stopped mid-stride, his expression a complicated mix of emotions: surprise, relief, perhaps a touch of guilt. "Sarah," he said, using the nickname from their brief relationship, his voice hesitant. "I've been looking everywhere for you." "That's strange," Sarah replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Since you blocked my number when I told you I was pregnant." To his credit, Mark winced. "I know, I was an idiot. I was scared and immature. And God, is that her? Is that my daughter?" His eyes were fixed on Lily, who regarded this stranger with cautious curiosity, her thumb in her mouth. "Her name is Lily," Sarah said. "She's 9 months old. Would it be okay if I held her?" Mark asked, taking a step forward. Eleanor, who had been silently observing from the doorway, stepped forward. Her presence, a steady, unyielding force, seemed to temper the awkwardness of the moment. "Why don't we all sit down and have a conversation first?" she suggested, her tone making it clear that Mark was being evaluated and found potentially wanting. "I'm Eleanor Vance, by the way." "This is my property you're standing on." Mark nodded, suddenly looking younger and less confident. They moved to the porch chairs, an unlikely quartet under the vast Alaskan sky. Mark explained that he had learned about Lily through a mutual friend's social media post that mentioned Sarah and her baby being spotted in Willow Creek. "I realized what I'd done," he said, his eyes moving between Sarah and Lily. "Running away from my responsibility. I'm not that person anymore. I've grown up a lot this past year." "What exactly do you want, Mark?" Sarah asked directly, cutting through his explanations. "To be part of her life, to help support her." He leaned forward earnestly, "to make things right." What followed was a complicated conversation about Mark's vision for their future. He had plans that sounded reasonable on the surface but revealed fundamental misunderstandings about Sarah's current life and her priorities. "I've got an apartment near campus," he explained. "My parents are helping with rent. You and Lily could move in. The community college has daycare. You could take classes while I finish my degree." "And where do I fit in these plans?" Sarah asked, her voice quiet but firm. Besides being Lily's caretaker, Mark looked confused, as if the answer were obvious. "You'd be taking classes too. We could make it work. Sarah, my parents feel terrible about how I handled things. They want to help." "So your parents know about Lily. They've accepted the situation." Mark shifted uncomfortably. "They're coming around. They're traditional, but a baby changes things. They want to meet their granddaughter." As he continued outlining his vision of their future, one where Sarah would essentially put her own dreams on hold to accommodate his education and career path, Eleanor observed in silence, her expression growing increasingly skeptical. Only once did she interject, when Mark suggested that his mother could help with childcare since she raised 4 kids. Sarah has been Lily's primary caregiver since birth, Eleanor pointed out, her voice level. She's quite capable. Oh, of course, Mark backpedaled quickly. I just meant for support. Throughout the conversation, Sarah noticed something telling. Mark spoke constantly about what he wanted, what his parents wanted, what society expected. But he rarely asked what Sarah wanted or needed. And more significantly, he never once inquired about Lily's routine, her personality, her development, or the life Sarah and Eleanor had built over the past 6 months. When Mark finally held Lily, awkwardly, nervously, the baby regarded him with a solemn assessment of infants encountering strangers. She didn't cry, but she kept looking back at Sarah and Eleanor, her known sources of security. She's amazing, Mark said, genuine awe in his voice. She has my eyes. She has her own eyes, Eleanor corrected quietly. After Mark left, with promises to return the next day, Sarah sat heavily in the porch chair, emotionally drained. What do you think? She asked Eleanor, who had remained uncharacteristically quiet throughout much of the visit. The older woman considered her response carefully. I think he's trying, in his limited way. But I also think his vision of the future centers himself, not you or Lily. He's her father, Sarah said, feeling the weight of that biological reality. Biology isn't destiny, Eleanor replied, her gaze steady. Trust me on that. The following day brought another unexpected development, a call from Sarah's mother, Martha, who had gotten the cabin's number from Chloe. Sarah, is it really you? Her mother's voice sounded thin and strained through the satellite communicator connection. It's me, Sarah confirmed, her emotions a tangled knot of longing and resentment. We've been so worried. Your father, he had a heart attack 3 weeks ago. The news landed like a physical blow. Despite everything, Sarah had never wished harm on her parents. Is he okay? He's recovering. It was minor, thank God, but it's changed him. Sarah, changed us both. Her mother's voice broke. We made a terrible mistake. We want to make things right. Like Mark's visit, the call ended with a request for Sarah to come home, to bring Lily, to be a family again. Her mother promised things would be different, that they had realized their error in choosing reputation over love. We have a room ready for you both, she said. We can help with college expenses. Your father wants to know his granddaughter. Yet, through the warmth and apparent sincerity, Sarah noticed something similar to her conversation with Mark. Her mother offered no actual apology for throwing her pregnant daughter out in winter. There was no acknowledgement of the trauma they had caused, just a desire to return to normalcy on their terms. After the call, Sarah found Eleanor teaching Lily about different types of snowflakes using paper cutouts, despite it being June. My father had a heart attack, she said, without preamble. They want me to come home. Eleanor looked up, her expression neutral. And do you want to go? I don't know. Sarah sank into a chair, watching as Lily manipulated the paper snowflakes with growing dexterity. Part of me misses them. They're my parents. Another part remembered standing in the snow with nowhere to go. People can change, Eleanor acknowledged. The question is whether they've changed enough to accept you and Lily as you are, not as they wish you to be. She set aside the snowflake activity and regarded Sarah thoughtfully. Do you want to go back because you miss them, or because you think that's what a normal family should be? The question hit with unexpected force. Sarah had spent so much of her life trying to fit into her parents' definition of normal, their religious expectations, their social standards, their vision of success. Even her pregnancy had been evaluated primarily through the lens of how it affected their standing in the community. A firm thought solidified in Sarah's mind. She would no longer let others decide what was best for her and Lily. She had found a different kind of normal, a truer normal, here in the wilderness. And she wouldn't give it up. The move to Fairbanks marks the beginning of a new chapter, an unconventional family finding its rhythm in a new setting, blending academic pursuits with the quiet work of healing and connection. That night, Sarah dreamed of the Jennings family home, spotless, quiet, with plastic covers on the furniture and family photographs showing perfect smiles that never quite reached the eyes. She contrasted it with Eleanor's cabin, chaotic, warm, filled with books and specimens and evidence of a life fully lived. In one, appearances mattered above all. In the other, truth was the only currency. The dream solidified her resolve. She wasn't going back to fit into a picture that wasn't hers. The following week brought both Mark and her parents to the cabin, a collision of past and present that Sarah had both dreaded and knew was necessary. Eleanor, with her usual pragmatism, prepared for their arrival. She cleaned the main areas, but left her scientific equipment and specimens prominently displayed. "This is who I am," she said, when Sarah suggested hiding some of the more unusual items. "And this is who you've become while living here. No reason to pretend otherwise." It was a quiet assertion of authenticity, a lesson Sarah had been learning by simply being in Eleanor's presence. David and Martha Jennings arrived first, their expensive SUV looking out of place on the rustic property. Martha emerged cautiously, dressed as if for church in a floral dress and cardigan, despite the casual setting. David moved more slowly, the recent heart attack evident in his careful movements and paler complexion. Their reaction to the cabin was exactly what Sarah had expected, poorly disguised dismay at the rustic conditions, questioning glances at Eleanor's collections, tight smiles that suggested they were enduring rather than engaging. "So, this is where you've been living?" Martha asked, trying to sound neutral but unable to hide her judgment. "This is where we found sanctuary," Sarah corrected gently, her voice steady, "when we had nowhere else to go." The introduction to Lily was awkward but touching. For all their faults, her parents seemed genuinely moved by their first sight of their granddaughter. Lily, now adept at sitting and reaching for objects of interest, regarded these new people with open curiosity. "She's beautiful," Martha whispered, tears forming. "She has your nose, Sarah." When Mark arrived an hour later, the situation grew exponentially more complex. He had brought his parents, a surprise addition that immediately changed the dynamic. Suddenly, the cabin was filled with 3 sets of adults, each with their own agenda for Sarah and Lily's future. Mark's parents were clearly uncomfortable in the remote setting, but made an effort to appear supportive. His mother had brought baby clothes and toys, presenting them with the air of someone bestowing great gifts. "We want to be part of our granddaughter's life," she announced, with a pointed look at Sarah's parents. The territorial subtext was unmistakable. Eleanor observed this unfolding drama with scientific detachment, offering coffee and simple refreshments while saying little. Yet, her presence was a steady anchor for Sarah amidst the emotional cross-currents. The conversations that followed were revealing. Both sets of parents outlined their visions for Sarah and Lily's future. Her parents offered financial support for college if she returned home, but with clear expectations about church attendance, appropriate behavior, and a tacit agreement that her mistake would be politely overlooked rather than accepted. Mark's parents proposed a more progressive but equally controlled future, suggesting Sarah and Mark should marry young, like they had, with both families supporting them through college. Their plan presumed Sarah would prioritize Mark's education first, then pursue her own goals when the timing was right. Throughout these discussions, Lily became fussy, overwhelmed by the unfamiliar voices and tension. Without prompting, Eleanor quietly took her outside to the porch, giving Sarah space to face these competing visions of her future alone. "I appreciate everything you're all offering," Sarah said finally, after listening to both families' proposals. Her voice was calm, measured, but firm. "But I need to make decisions based on what's best for Lily and me, not what's most comfortable for everyone else." "Of course, dear," her mother said with a tight smile. "We just want to help you get back on track." "I'm not off track," Sarah replied with newfound confidence, a strength in her voice that surprised even herself. "I'm on a different track than the one you planned for me." She took a deep breath and delivered the news she had been holding close. "I've been accepted to the University of Alaska's science program with a scholarship for student parents. Eleanor has been helping me prepare." This announcement was met with stunned silence, then a flurry of objections. "But that's so far from home." "What about Mark's role as a father? We've already prepared a room for you both." Sarah held up her hand, a gesture she had learned from Eleanor when discussions became unproductive. "Lily and I aren't a problem to be fixed or an embarrassment to be hidden," she said firmly. "We're a family, just not the kind you expected." When Lily began crying in earnest from the porch, the conversation naturally paused. Sarah joined Eleanor outside, taking her daughter into her arms with practiced ease. "You're doing well," Eleanor murmured, just loud enough for Sarah to hear. "Stand your ground." As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, though at this time of year it would not truly set, the visitors prepared to leave. The conversations had reached an uneasy pause rather than a resolution, with all parties agreeing to think things over. Before departing, Sarah's father asked to speak with her privately on the porch, away from the others. He seemed smaller somehow, less intimidating than the man who had thrown her possessions into the snow months ago. "I was wrong," he said simply, the words clearly difficult for him. "My heart attack. It makes you think about what really matters." He paused, his gaze drifting to Lily, now calm in Sarah's arms. "I'm not saying I understand all your choices, but I don't want to lose my daughter and granddaughter because of my pride." It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was a start, the first genuine acknowledgement of wrongdoing from either of her parents. As the cars disappeared down the long driveway, Sarah felt a curious lightness. The conversations had been difficult, the competing expectations exhausting, but for the first time, she had maintained her boundaries. She hadn't backed down. "You didn't tell me about the scholarship," Eleanor said, as they watched the last car disappear from view. "I just found out yesterday," Sarah admitted. "I was going to tell you tonight." Eleanor nodded, something like pride flickering across her features. "Good. It's a solid program. Their environmental science department has improved considerably in recent years." Standing her ground doesn't mean being defiant, Sarah thought. It means being true to yourself. She had chosen her path, and she was ready to walk it. As winter blankets Fairbanks in snow, 3 generations gather, a testament to the transformative power of love, resilience, and the unexpected paths that lead us home. Later that evening, as Lily slept and the endless summer twilight bathed the cabin in soft golden light, Sarah and Eleanor sat on the porch, the events of the day settling around them like the evening mist. "All those people," Sarah mused, watching a pair of ravens circle above the tree line, "offering different versions of my future, each one so certain they know what's best." "And what do you think is best?" Eleanor asked, her voice quiet. Sarah considered this, the vast Alaskan landscape stretching out before them. "I think I need to build something new, not reject everything from my past, but not be limited by it either." She turned to Eleanor, a depth of gratitude in her eyes that words couldn't fully capture. "What you've given us isn't just shelter, it's perspective, a different way of seeing the world." "The best science comes from looking at familiar things with new eyes," Eleanor replied, a rare, soft smile touching her lips. "Perhaps the best lives do too." The ravens called to each other, their voices echoing across the valley. In the distance, the mountains stood sentinel against the evening sky, unchanged by human dramas, yet witness to them all. "Whatever you decide," Eleanor said quietly, her gaze steady, "this cabin remains a place you can always return to. A constant in an inconstant world." It wasn't quite, "I love you." It wasn't quite, "You are family now." But, coming from Eleanor Vance, scientist and survivor, it was perhaps something even more meaningful, a promise of belonging without conditions, of acceptance without judgment. Sarah reached over and briefly squeezed Eleanor's weathered hand. "Thank you," she said simply. Above them, the ravens continued their aerial dance, black wings against the endless light of the Alaskan summer sky. The move to Fairbanks marked the beginning of their new chapter. The Vance Fairbanks house, while unfamiliar at first, quickly developed its own rhythm and character. Sarah's classes began, challenging her mind in ways she had missed during pregnancy and early motherhood. Lily adjusted to the Northern Lights University Child Development Center, developing social skills with other children while maintaining her special bond with Eleanor during evenings and weekends. Eleanor herself underwent a subtle transformation in the urban setting. While still fundamentally independent and occasionally prickly, she developed unexpected connections. Several retired professors from Northern Lights University, learning of her return, sought her out for conversations about research. A local environmental group invited her to speak about long-term ecological observations. Most significantly, she began mentoring selected students who showed particular promise in environmental sciences. These informal sessions, often held in their living room with Lily playing nearby, became known among serious students as more valuable than official class. "Do you realize you're teaching again?" Sarah asked one evening after a particularly intense discussion with 3 graduate students about permafrost changes. "I'm correcting misconceptions," Eleanor replied with characteristic modesty. "If that constitutes teaching, so be it." As autumn painted the birch forests golden around Fairbanks, the household settled into productive routines. Sarah's academic performance was exceptional. Her research project digitizing Eleanor's decades of ecological observations had caught the attention of her professors, transforming a simple independent study into a potentially groundbreaking compilation of long-term Arctic ecosystem data. Benjamin continued to be a supportive presence, visiting during holidays or academic breaks, offering guidance not just academically, but in navigating the complex landscape of her evolving life. Mark's involvement remained consistent but limited. He would visit every few months, bringing gifts for Lily, showing genuine affection without the daily responsibilities of parenting. Sarah had long since made peace with this arrangement, understanding that families could take many forms. "Some people are daily bread," Benjamin had observed during one such visit, present at every meal. "Others are special occasions, no less important, but serving a different purpose." Her parents' reconciliation was slow but steady. David, humbled by his health scare, made more effort than Martha, who still struggled to fully accept Sarah's independent choices. Yet, there were moments of genuine connection, carefully negotiated but real. On a crisp December evening, as snow blanketed Fairbanks, Eleanor made an unexpected announcement. "I've been offered a visiting scholar position," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "A joint appointment between the university's Department of Environmental Science and the Climate Research Institute." Sarah looked up, surprised. "But you've always avoided formal academic positions." Eleanor's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "Times change, and apparently, my decades of research are now considered valuable historical data." She rolled her eyes at the academic terminology. The position was perfect. It allowed Eleanor to continue her research, mentor students, and maintain the flexible lifestyle she cherished. More importantly, it provided stability for their unconventional family. Lily, now 3. Playing with a set of geological samples Eleanor had carefully curated for her, looked up. "Grandma Maeve, will you teach me about rocks today?" The term grandma, a name Eleanor had never asked for but had quietly accepted, settled naturally into the warmth of the room. "Come here," Eleanor said, spreading out a collection of rock samples. "Let me show you how these stones tell stories older than any human could imagine." As the winter darkness pressed against the windows of their Fairbanks home, 3 generations sat together, a teenage mother who had defied expectations, an eccentric scientist who had found redemption and renewed purpose, and a curious child who represented hope and continuity. Their story was far from a traditional narrative. It was messy, complicated, filled with unexpected turns. But it was undeniably a story of love, the kind of love that chooses, that grows, that transforms. And in the end, isn't that what family truly means? Perhaps this story makes you wonder. Have you ever found family in a place you least expected? Sometimes the most profound connections arrive without warning, changing the course of our lives in beautiful, unexpected ways. If this journey resonated with you, perhaps consider sharing your own thoughts below, or joining us for future stories of resilience and hope by subscribing.